You opened the fridge today. Maybe twice. Maybe 5 times. You stood there, door open, cold air drifting out, staring at food you chose not to eat because nothing looked right. Now imagine that fridge does not exist. The field outside your door is empty. The river is low. The animals have moved on. And you have not eaten in 3 days. That was not a nightmare. That was Tuesday for most of human history. For roughly 300,000 years before the first farm was planted, your ancestors lived in a world where food did not arrive on a schedule. It came in waves. Feast, then nothing. Abundance, then silence. And when the silence stretched long enough to become a famine, they did not simply starve and wait. They adapted. They improvised. They ate things that would make you set your fork down. What they ate during those empty seasons reveals something deep about the body you are living in right now. Start with what archaeologists call fallback foods. These are not foods your ancestors preferred. These are foods they turned to when everything else disappeared. Researcher Richard Wrangham, a primatologist at Harvard University, has studied the dietary patterns of early hominins and argues that fallback foods were not a last resort. They were a survival strategy, a backup system hard-coded into forager behavior. The most common fallback food was underground storage organs, tubers, roots, bulbs, corms, things buried beneath the soil that most animals could not easily access. Your ancestors dug for them with sharpened sticks, with their hands, with tools made from bone. They carried digging implements the way you carry a wallet. These starchy underground packages were calorie-dense, available year-round in many regions, and largely invisible to competing species. Anthropologist Alison Brooks has argued that the capacity to exploit underground plant foods may have been one of the defining cognitive advantages of Homo sapiens over other hominins. You had to remember where these plants grew. You had to know the landscape intimately. You had to be able to plan across seasons, to think months ahead, to know that the barren-looking hillside in January held food 2 feet down. That is not survival instinct. That is intelligence under pressure. But roots and tubers were only part of the picture. When famine deepened, your ancestors moved into territory most modern humans would find deeply uncomfortable. They ate insects, not as a novelty, not as a dare, as a staple. Termites, beetle larvae, caterpillars, grasshoppers, ants. Entomologist Jean de Foliart spent decades documenting traditional insect consumption across human cultures and found evidence of insect eating in nearly every foraging society ever studied. The nutritional profile explains why. 100 grams of dried termites contains more protein than the same weight of beef. Beetle larvae are dense in fat. In a world where calories were the difference between life and death, insects were a concentrated, accessible, renewable source of energy. Your ancestors did not need to be convinced to eat them. They were not squeamish. Squeamishness is a luxury of abundance. In a famine, an ant colony was not a nuisance. It was a meal. They also ate things they would not normally hunt. Small rodents, lizards, frogs. The kinds of animals that barely register as prey when larger game is available become extremely valuable when larger game is gone. Zoo archaeologist Penny Spickens at the University of York has noted that during periods of resource stress, the diversity of animal bones found at archaeological sites increases dramatically. The prey base widens. The hunters get less selective. They scraped marrow from bones they had already eaten, cracked skulls to access brain tissue, consumed cartilage, tendons, organs that a modern butcher would discard. Nothing was wasted. In a famine, the concept of waste was not just impractical, it was incomprehensible. They ate bark. The inner bark of certain trees, especially birch and pine, contains enough starch and sugar to provide meaningful calories. Evidence of bark processing has been found at multiple Paleolithic sites in Europe and Asia. Birch tar, a byproduct of heating birch bark, has been found on ancient stone tools. Your ancestors were not just eating bark. They were learning to process it, to extract its value, to turn it into something more digestible than it naturally was. They drank blood, mixed with milk in East African pastoral traditions, drunk directly from living animals in moments of desperation. Blood is rich in iron and protein. It keeps you alive. Your ancestors knew this. They ate clay. Geophagy, the deliberate consumption of earth, has been documented in dozens of human cultures and is practiced today in parts of Africa, South America, and Asia. Clay can bind to plant toxins, making otherwise poisonous foods safe to eat. It may also provide trace minerals. In a famine, it is not madness to eat dirt. It is chemistry. It is the body finding a workaround. And here is where it becomes personal for you. Because your body was built for this. The way your metabolism slows when food is scarce. The way your brain floods with thoughts of eating when you are hungry, making it nearly impossible to concentrate on anything else. The way your body holds on to fat stores with extraordinary tenacity, resisting weight loss in ways that frustrate every modern dieter. None of this is malfunction. All of this is design. You were engineered for the famine your ancestors survived. Researcher Ansel Keys conducted a landmark study in 1944 known as the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. He placed 36 conscientious objectors on a severe caloric restriction diet for 6 months. The psychological effects were as profound as the physical ones. The men became obsessed with food. They talked about it constantly, dreamed about it, collected recipes, lingered over menus. Some began hoarding food irrationally. Their personalities changed. Their social bonds shifted. Everything narrowed toward one single focus. Keys did not discover something new. He rediscovered something ancient. That is what your brain does when food disappears. It does not let you forget. It does not let you rest. It pushes you relentlessly toward the next calorie. Because in the world your ancestors inhabited, the person who stopped thinking about food was the person who did not survive the famine. Your modern food environment never triggers the end of that program. The obsession never fully resolves because the famine never fully arrives. You live in permanent abundance, running software written for permanent scarcity. This is why restriction diets feel like psychological warfare. This is why you cannot eat just one. This is why hunger is not just physical. It is ancient and it is urgent. And it runs deeper than any decision you can make at the kitchen counter. Your ancestors ate bark and beetles and blood and clay to stay alive long enough to have children who eventually had children who eventually became you. Every uncomfortable adaptation, every strange fallback food, every act of desperate ingenuity was passed forward through time until it arrived in your body. So the next time you open that fridge and stand there, door open, cold air drifting out, bored with your options, understand what you are really looking at. You are looking at the end of the famine. And some part of you, deep and ancient and not entirely convinced, is still not sure it is safe to stop searching.